sometimes you've got to turn to outside sources to get I think, a pretty good balanced view on things. And we come now to a article from Ireland, and I think it's very, very clear what we've been saying for the past month is not only being echoed around the UK, but around the rest of the world, that Boris is a complete bungler. And here we have from a guy called Peter Flanagan. So, Boris the Bungler has been a calamity for the UK, but it's ordinary people who will pay the price. I think all this talk of World War III and bubonic plague is demented, frankly. Those are the words of Boris Johnson in a televised interview during the Leave campaign, dismissing the consequences of Brexit as sensationalist and fear-mongering. Incredibly, when Britain finally left the EU on the 31st of January, a plague is exactly what followed. As things stand, a world war may not be entirely unlikely either. At least it would give us an excuse to get out of the house. While COVID-19 cannot be blamed on the English nationalism, the messy response of the movement's leadership has turned tragedy to farce. On Thursday, a senior foreign official claimed that the UK's failure to take part in the EU ventilator procurement scheme in March was a political decision, contradicting the previous claim that the government had simply missed an email. He later retracted the remarks. The fact that officials could have deliberately put ideology over saving lives is outrageous. When challenged, Health Secretary Matt Hancock claimed to have since joined the scheme, a claim immediately rebutted by the European Commission spokesperson. Hancock's party's Eurosceptic agenda is now being exposed for what it is. Brexiteers probably view the ventilator programme as just another galling affront to British sovereignty, like freedom of movement or human rights. Meanwhile, the Germans, whose well-financed health system has been universally praised for its ICU capacity and widespread testing, have even had to check to fly in sick patients from overwhelmed neighbours. Another flagrant lack of respect for national boundaries. If given the chance, these dastardly krauts would probably try to heal every sick man, woman and child in Britain. From a national determination to isolate itself from Europe, the UK's initial reluctance to apply for the same social distancing from one another was remarkable. As for their EU counterparts who went into a lockdown early in March, Johnson and his team dithered and spread the virus amongst themselves, his cabinet becoming an orgy of pestilence. The Tory leader is now recovering from his bout of coronavirus at Chequers, thanks in no small part to the immigrant nurses who provided his care. Intolerance of foreign nationals is a luxury the UK can no longer afford, though it probably being stockpiled somewhere else by the people who will panic buy toilet paper. Meanwhile, a decade of underfunding of social services is reaching its logical, painful outcome. As frontline NHS staff beg for sufficient PPE gear and access to testing, the government instead led the nation in the clap for the NHS, and demonstrations applauding hysterically like demented xenophobic seals. As well-intentioned as the jesters have been, nurses and doctors cannot protect themselves from the virus with long overdue goodwill. Not all civil servants have faced delays with testing and treatment, however. Prince Charles was looked after immediately and can now resume his essential duties, including attending luncheons, waving, giving speeches. The Queen has done her bit too, with a public address, although it may have been more useful to hear from Prince Andrew, socially isolated for months. His tips could have been invaluable. Against this chaotic backdrop, it would have been easy to miss the election of Labour's new leader, Keir Starmer, a centrist who blends legit working-class credentials with reassuring professional pedigree. Starmer could have been created in the same laboratory that made Tony Blair. Smoulderingly boring, his depth of charisma is intoxicating and refreshing compared to the extremes to which we've become accustomed. All he needs is to be given the government enough rope to hang itself, and he'll have a decent chance of taking power, undoing the Tories' uh, uh, radical radical spending agenda, and finally implementing some proper conservative policies. The Prime Minister has rivals within his own cabinet too, of course, though the supply of credible contenders is vanishing thin. His chosen stand-in, Dominic Raab, has seen the shaky confidence of a substitute teacher in an inner-city school. Rishi Shark, who won fans with his Oprah Winfrey-style fiscal policy, everyone look in the seats, you get a subsidy, and you get a subsidy, will be in. But this will change if and when he rolls out an austerity budget to pay for it. Priti Patel suggested that Britain threatened Ireland with food shortages during the Brexit negotiations and has been accused of bullying by her staff. She might have less likability than the Wuhan bat, but it's a testament to the lack of talent on the Tory front benches that even a premier in intensive care needn't have worried about being replaced. For now, then, Johnson's position remains secure, elevated to the status of national martyr by the tabloid press. The fetishisation of his recovery took precedence over the reaction on why the UK mortality rate has been gradually outpaced over that of its neighbours like Ireland. The Mirror, for example, thought it newsworthy that the bed-bound Premier watched the movie Home Alone, the harrowing tale of wealthy parents abandoning their son without putting him to a boarding school first. As Johnson continues his rehabilitation in Chequers, it is his personnel like Raab who will take the brunt of the criticism for the bungled pandemic response that has brought its nation to the knees. Nevertheless, the reality is dropping on the public like a guillotine, and that the reckoning Johnson is due is surely only being postponed. A frat boy masquerading as a public servant, I wouldn't argue that his leadership has been a calamity for the country. While his health is recovering, his daft politics of delusion must not. And sort of, I agree with that wholeheartedly. As for Keir Starmer, look, I understand he's a centrist, but in a time of where we need to reverse austerity, he said going back to the Labour manifesto of 2017 is a good starting point. And hey, we all loved the 27 Labour manifesto, so until we start to see what policies he would actually implement and put in place, that's where we can start to judge. And hey, if you're a member of Momentum and you're disappointed that Long Bailey didn't get in, I understand, but that doesn't mean you should give up. Keep on arguing for your policies. Keep on arguing for them. And when it comes to MP selections, put forward why your guy is going to be good. And it's not just people who will lead the party, but it's people who will be future members of Parliament, people who will go forward into the Labour Party itself, because as we have seen from those Labour Party leaks, it looks like that the unelected guys at the top basically screwed over Corbyn and put his chances of being elected to nothing. And that's the unfortunate reality. We have to say we lost this time, but we have to not stop trying and keep on trying. And now we know what didn't work before and what does work, and we need to keep on trying that and keep on moving that forward. You lose one battle, but you don't lose the war. And if you give up once, you give up forever. So to the people out there, and I say this now, I was Starmer from the word go. I recognise pretty much he's the only guy at that time that could beat Boris. Now, Long Bailey, I will say this now, of my criticisms of her, were always that she was not a good public speaker. She would not be able to do good against Boris, and that would be where it counts, and that would be where she succeeds or fails. She has done some terrible interviews in the past where she's just completely floundered. That is completely true. What surprised me, I'll say this now, if she had acted and given speeches and done interviews like she had done towards the end of the campaign, um, at the start or even before, then absolutely, there would be no question, um, she would have won. No question. But hey, there's always a possibility she might be the future leader in the future. I have confidence that, given how she improved, if she continues that trajectory, I have full confidence she will be a future leader of the Labour Party.